Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Rice, a podcast hosted by the University of California Cooperative Extension Rice Advisors. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah Marsh, Janish, and I'm a rice farm advisor for Colusa and Yolo counties.
I'm Whitney from DeForest. I'm the Cooperative Extension Rice Advisor for Sutter, Yuba, Placer, and Sacramento counties.
My name is Luis Espino. I'm the Rice Farming Systems Advisor for Butte and Glenn counties.
I'm Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. I'm a farm advisor in the Delta region. I work on all sorts of field crops, grains and forages, but one of those is rice. And the counties that I cover are San Joaquin, Sacramento, Yolo, Solano, and Contra Costa counties.
Together, the UCCE Rice Farm Advisors seek to provide relevant, topical, research-backed information relating to California rice production. Today, Luis Espino and I get to talk about the results of the 2024 Rice Disease Survey, which we compiled this last season. The objective of the survey is to document the incidence of rice diseases in Sacramento Valley rice fields, so that the California Air Resources Board agrees to continue to allow the rice industry to burn up to 25% of the available rice acreage. Hi, Luis.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you?
Good. Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Yeah, all good. Let's chat about the Rice Disease Survey. Since 2014, we've performed this survey every 5 years. And when I say we, I mean University of California Cooperative Extension. So can you tell me a bit about what happened to cause this disease survey to start?
Yeah. So, back in the early 2000s, we transitioned from straw burning in any area, any field, to only 25% of the acreage. And so when that transition happened, initially the grower had to prove that he had diseases in the field. And so they were trained by, at the time, the farm advisors. And then at some point, also maybe the ag biologists from the ag commissioner's offices. So they would come and inspect the fields and kind of show that there was disease and document that before they could be allowed to burn. So what happened was that every inspection that was made showed that, yes, there was disease and, as expected, and the fields were allowed to be burned. And so at some point, it was decided that it would make more sense to just show the level of disease valley-wide and use that as a proxy of, how much disease is there in the field. And so that's why we do it this way now. Instead of having the grower, having to certify that he has disease, having somebody come to inspect, we just use the information generated from the survey and say, like, yes, we're still seeing diseases. And burning is a good way of reducing disease inoculant.
Yeah, that seems like that places a lot of burden on the grower and the ag commissioners to go out and inspect all of these fields prior to allocating a burn permit. So It seems like the rice disease survey is a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I think it serves that purpose. And it also, I think it gives us, farm advisors and specialists, people working on rice, gives us a good overview of what's going on in the field and how much disease is out there.
Absolutely. Really valuable information coming out of the disease survey. Let's go into the methodology of the disease survey itself. What does it look like when we do the disease survey? How long does it take? How many counties? How do we decide how much disease is in a rice field?
What we do is in drain time, so late August, early September, we start the survey because that's the time when we're going to see the diseases most severely, affecting the rice. So they're easier to identify. And so what we do is we take a team of, anywhere between 5, 6, 7 scouts, and we just go across the valley. And we have a number of fields that we need to inspect. And so for the large counties, like, rice growing counties like Colusa, Glen, Butte, we do 10 fields. And then for the medium size, we do 5. And then for the smaller counties, like maybe Sacramento or Placer, we just do 2 fields. And those numbers are sort of arbitrary, but I think they give us a good idea of geographically, it kind of show up real nice on the map. So it gives you a good distribution of the fields in the map. And so we go to fields, we have a number of fields, and we just randomly choose fields. We go into these fields, and every one of the scouts goes in, and then we do a certain number of stops in the field. And on each stop, the scouts would look for the 4 main diseases that we have. So we look for stem rot, aggregate sheath spot, kernel smut, and blast. And this year we did see a little bit of bacony. And so we noted that. Not a lot, but there was, in the past we had never really run into bacony. So this was the first year that we were seeing bacony. So we noted that as well. So we just go by presence absence. So we're not really trying to quantify, on a stop, like how many tillers show stem rot or how many panicles have blast. We just look for presence absence. And so each scout does a number of stops, and we shoot for at least 30 observations per field. And so we have 30 observations, and then we move on to the next field. And so with that, we can kind of have a feeling, we can calculate a percent incidence of the 4 diseases.
So with all of these stops, I think I read in your report that there are over 1,600 individual observations made across the rice disease survey. So it seems like that's a pretty robust data set to get an idea of how much disease is in the area.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting because we've been doing this now. This is our 3rd time doing it. So we do it every 5 years. This is the 3rd time we've done it. And so I've been looking at what we did the 2 previous times. And a couple of diseases, stem rot and aggregate sheath spot, they are pretty much the same. The levels that we see have been very, very similar.
Interesting.
Yeah, but blast, for example, which is a disease that varies quite a bit. In some years, we see more. And this year, we only run into a few fields where we saw 1 panicle in each field with blast. So very low levels. And that's what, we've seen during the season, kind of just looking around and responding to PCAs and growers' calls, if they were suspecting blast. I went to a couple of those, and it was in blast, right? So we kind of knew that it was a low blast year, but with the survey, we know very little blast out there.
It's great, though, that you can see immediately that reflection of how accurate the disease survey has been, at least with the blast survey, with the real life results that we're seeing in the field of not very much blast recorded in the disease survey, not very much blast reported, at least to us and across the rice growing region.
Right. And then with the tiller diseases, like stem rot and aggregate sheath spot, so those, we've talked about them at grower meetings quite a bit. Those the inoculum goes into the field. And so you would expect that they would be somewhat similar every year, if not increasing over time, but it doesn't seem to be increasing. It's already they're present pretty widespread across the valley. So it makes sense that every year we find about roughly, the same amount of observations positive for those 2 diseases. And the same with kernel smut, it varies a little bit, right? Depending on the year.
Any other differences between this recent disease survey and the past disease surveys in terms of disease proportions?
I think the main one was blast. And then that depends on the years. If we would have done the survey in 2023, which was a blast year, we would have found it in a lot more places, right? But no, everything else, like I said, was similar, and with the added of identifying some bacony here and there.
Let's go over this a little bit. So we talked about how this year, unlike other years, we did see some more bacony. And can you explain why we usually don't search for Bacchinae during the rice disease survey?
Yeah, it was something we didn't look for in the past because we didn't really have Bacchinae levels that would be identifiable
Mm-hmm.
at that time. We've seen over the past, I don't know, now it's been maybe like 4 years or so, three years, an increase in Bacchinae. I suspect it comes mostly from a reduction in the use of bleach as a seed treatment.
Because just for people who aren't aware, that's when we treat for Bacchinae. Before we fly on our seed, we'll soak the seed in a bleach solution for a period of time before flying on the seed, and that can help kill the Bacchinae before it actually takes effect on the plant itself.
Right. It kind of disinfests the seed. So Bacchinae is transmitted mostly on the seed. And so treating the seed with the bleach, it's really effective. You can have some instances where you do see Bacchinae in treated seed, but for the most part, it's very unusual. And so with these, previous years, we were seeing a little bit more Bacchinae. It looks like, maybe because not all seed is being treated. So some of what happens is that the seedlings that get infected, most of them die before they don't really last past tillering. But there are a few that will survive, and then those will develop symptoms towards the end of the cycle. And so the plants just, by the time the panicle should be produced, the panicle comes out, but it's blanked. And then the whole plant just starts dying, and you can see the sporulation on the tiller. And so they're kind of easy to identify once you see them. But there's not many of them. But, it's interesting that we were not finding any of those in the past, and now we're seeing a little bit.
Yeah, going on to that, what do we then do with the results of the disease survey? We've collected all this information, you've compiled it, you've made the statistical analysis, but what do we do with it then? Does it just sit in a drawer, or does it go somewhere?
Well, no. So this information then is provided to the Air Resources Board. We present the information, and they use that to kind of make the determination that, yes, there's diseases are still a problem in rice cultivation. And so we're going to continue with the burn program and, letting growers burn up to 25%. That's the main use of the information. So we're getting some other information in terms of, how widespread some of these diseases were. And also if there was anything new that would be starting, any new disease, and we started to pick it up on the survey, that would be also helpful to know there's something that we need to start doing to prevent something else coming to affect us.
Just anecdotally, having done the disease survey with you and the team this summer, it was also a great opportunity to get a look at some weeds that we were seeing in the field, just in random fields that we happened to be surveying, some different weeds than we were usually seeing around rice fields. So as far as just getting more information in terms of rice production, being in the field itself seemed to be pretty anecdotally important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you get to see things that otherwise you might miss, because you're not really looking. Something related to that, for example, we were on a field where we started to find a lot of armyworms. That was interesting because, we do the armyworm trapping and we do monitor for armyworm. So we have 3 or 4 fields that we monitor through the season to see what the population's doing. And we were not finding any armyworms at heading. But when we visited this field, there was a ton of armyworms.
And that's later in the season than we usually see a lot of armyworms, right?
Yeah. I mean, they can still be there at heading. So brings home the message that every field's a little bit different, and you can have a lot of fields with no armyworms on them or no disease. And then there are some fields that, for whatever reason, they will have a lot more pressure. Always like to think about, what one of my teachers said, the best thing you can put on your field is your shadow, because you have to be in your field to know what's going on.
I like that. That's really, really important because, yeah, you can see things from your truck, from the side of the field, but the reality is you're not going to see the full picture.
Yeah, or just hearing, what's going on, like the neighbors, or if the PCAs are saying, "Oh, we're not seeing any of this," but like you never know. It's always good to go and take a look.
So, in the recent disease survey, we saw different diseases that were prevalent across the region and actually saw higher incidences of some of the diseases in specific sub areas. And so, for example, we saw that Glenn County actually had the highest incidence of stem rot. So, can you explain why the disease presence might be higher in some areas versus others?
Well, there are some differences in terms of weather. Up north, it tends to be a little warmer. Glenn County can have a little warmer weather than some of the southern part of the valley. And so that can be a contributing factor. I don't know if there's really a variety effect. I haven't looked at the acreage of the different varieties per county or region. So I don't know if that would be. But my guess is it's probably mostly weather related. And so, for example, we did see more stem rot. And typically, if this would have been a blast year, we would have seen most of the blast up on Glenn County and Colusa County, because those are the areas where the weather seems to be more favorable for blast. But also thinking of another disease, and this is aggregate sheath spot, which is not a major disease, but it's present, it's widespread. It was a little bit more noticeable on the east side of the valley, which we know that it's soil related and related to potassium. And so some of the soils on the east side tend to be more deficient on potassium just because of the type of clay that they have. And so we tend to see a little bit more of aggregate sheath spot.
Okay. So I guess two of these diseases then, and you've mentioned them already, but stem rot and aggregate sheath spot can actually be pretty highly influenced by agronomic practices, which can include fertility, like added fertility, and straw management. Can you touch on a little bit about how these agronomic practices can influence the development of these diseases?
Yeah, so I think, for the tiller diseases, there's nitrogen certainly has a strong effect on stem rot. So, and unfortunately, we need nitrogen, and we need nitrogen to reach our yields, the optimal yields. But the more nitrogen you add, makes the plants more susceptible to stem rot. So in some cases, it's kind of hard to avoid. You're not going to reduce your nitrogen just to have less stem rot.
Right.
But I think it's important to keep in mind because, you don't want to add nitrogen as thinking of, well, maybe just as an insurance or without properly assessing the need of the crop, right? Like, if you're going to use a top dress, well, maybe go out and use the leaf color chart and make sure that you do need it. With aggregate sheath spot, it's more related to potassium. And so if you have a potassium deficiency, aggregate sheath spot can be problematic. I wouldn't say a major problem, but it can be problematic. And it's similar for stem rot. So stem rot can also be more severe when there's a potassium deficiency. And so potassium, it's a very important nutrient. And I think most of the growers and the PCAs on the east side know that very well because, they've seen it. But a lot of times on the west side, we're not so aware of it because we've always thought that we have plenty of potassium and that deficiencies will not occur. But we've seen the potassium deficiency symptoms on the west side. And, it could be just that the information about having enough potassium, it's from quite a few years back, and so the varieties are different. Our yields are higher, than say 30-40 years ago. Our yields are much higher, so we're extracting quite a bit more. So yeah, we've seen potassium deficiency symptoms on the west side. So it's something that it's important to keep in mind, that review your soil fertility, at soil sample, leaf sample, and make sure that you have enough in there, because it not only affects the plants directly, but then you can end up with more disease pressure by not addressing the fertility. And then blast also is related to nitrogen. So the same as with stem rot, if you have too much nitrogen, then your blast can be more severe. But that's another one where, well, we need the yield, so we can't really cut down much on nitrogen.
Yeah, you can't tell someone, hey, you might have a disease next year, so cut back on your nitrogen. That's not going to fly. Is there data to suggest that the reduction of burning of rice straw has influenced the rate of potassium available in the soils?
I don't think anybody's looked at that.
I feel like it'd be hard to test that.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to go back in time and find some soil samples, and there might be some, because Bruce did some work just recently on potassium levels across the valley. So that information is available. And I know there's some information, I can't remember, but it's some of the work that I think Scardaci did. And I think he looked at potassium. There's something floating around there. So one could go back and look at and compare levels. But I don't know how scientific that would be because they're not the same fields.
Not a lot of control in that.
Right. But it would be an interesting exercise, yeah. I started working on rice here in California in 2007, and I worked then with Chris Greer. Chris was a plant pathologist, and so I helped him with some of his work, and we would do some fungicide trials. And it's interesting because he did trials at least for a couple of years, and we couldn't find an effect on. Basically, we were testing a quadris or azoxystrobin, and we didn't see an effect on the tiller diseases.
Interesting.
And then he moved out of the area, and so we really didn't do any work for a few years until maybe 2018 or 2019 when I started doing again. After having quite a bit of growers coming with disease issues, I started doing the trials again, and then we started seeing a strong effect of azoxystrobin on the tiller diseases. And so that might be related to the burn over the years. As we've stopped burning, we might be increasing our inoculum levels to the point where in the past there wasn't enough disease to show an effect.
But now there's higher levels of disease and then the azoxystrobin.
Yeah, maybe it was too spotty, so you would pick it up here but not there. But now after almost 20 years of no burning, we do see an effect. I mean, it's really obvious.
While we're talking about straw anyway, so the pathogens that cause the rice diseases, the tiller diseases, they can actually overwinter in the rice straw in the form called sclerotia, and that can actually survive in the tissue and accumulate in the soil over time. Is there another way besides burning to reduce the survival of the sclerotia in the rice fields?
Yeah, so the sclerotia, they will remain on the rice, and then early in the spring, when it starts warming up, say March, April, so those sclerotia will germinate, and they'll use the rice straw to as a food source, and then produce more sclerotia, produce more inoculum. And so if you decompose the rice straw so that it's not available, then you can reduce that increase that we get, not during the season, but later during the fallow period. So that's why it's important to get, if you're not burning, to try to get good decomp, because that limiting how much inoculum is being produced in the field.
So a method, maybe flood, stomp the field, try and get that straw to decompose.
Yeah, anything you can do to promote straw decomposition will help. Of course, burning is the best. And if you reduce the amount of straw in the field, so if you're baling, that would also, we can say, theoretically help. But I don't think we have any actual data to prove that baling helps. Because, when you bale, you're still leaving half the straw behind. You can't cut it all the way to the ground, and there's always going to be some straw. Just like as when you burn, you also, there's always some left behind. But you're reducing the amount of substrate the pathogen will have to increase more inoculum, to produce more inoculum later.
Is there evidence to support the survival of the sclerotia in the baled straw bales that come off the field, so that if they were broken up, they could potentially spread disease somewhere else?
I guess they could. There's some work from Bob Webster, who used to be the plant pathologist at UC Davis, and he determined that the half-life of the sclerotia is 2 years.
Ew, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, if there was sclerotia in the rice straw and that straw is moved somewhere else, I guess they could survive.
Theoretically, yeah.
Yeah. But as long as they're not put back in a rice field,
Doesn't really matter.
yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about the diseases, and I want to note here, we haven't talked a lot about control of the diseases in season. And a point of that, I think, comes back to a presentation I saw you make a few months ago, where you were talking about disease management, and then the next slide was quadrus management, because in California, we don't have a lot of chemicals we can use to control rice diseases. Would you like to touch on, I guess, the availability or lack of availability of chemical control of rice diseases in California?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have really a lot of fungicides. We really have two. We have azoxystrobin, and it does work. And we do have propiconazole. And that one, it's only for kernel smut. So yeah, those two fungicides are available for the rice industry. And so it's important to use them, correctly. The timing is very important, especially for blast and kernel smut and stem rot. I found that aggregate sheet spot, the timing is not so critical. We tend to get control even if you put it on too early. But if you go either too early or too late with stem rot, you don't get as good control. It has to be very early heading. That's when we get the best control for stem rot. And with blast is similar. We get it, the best control is early heading, maybe starting from late boot to early heading. That might be a good time. And then if you're thinking of kernel smut, the timing is going to be at the boot stage. So if you go too late, if you go early heading, that's too late for kernel smut. So it's a little, it could get a little confusing, but so I think, when we're talking about disease management, it's between the boot stage, maybe mid boot, to the early heading stage. That's the window for fungicide applications. And then, it's challenging because a lot of these diseases like blast and kernel smut, we don't see them at that time.
Right.
At least with blast, if you've seen leaf blast, then you have something to go on. It's like, okay, yeah, we need to do a treatment because we might get some neck blast. But with kernel smut, it's tricky because, kernel smut doesn't...
You can't even see the kernels yet. Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't show until the panicle is mature. So you really have to go with the history of the field, and the area. If kernel smut's been a problem in the past, then you might decide to do a treatment. Now, with the tiller diseases, you can do an assessment in the field to see how much you have. And we're doing some work on that. And I think we have some data that shows that, yeah, you can relate, especially stem rot. We haven't had enough fields of aggregate sheet spot to make conclusions. But stem rot, you can go in at the boot stage and make an assessment of how much stem rot you have and predict how much you're going to have at the end of the season. And so make a decision as to, is this going to really affect the yield or not? So we're going to do that again this year. And based on that, maybe, here in the future, we can come up with a more systematic way of determining stem rot levels before, the end of the season. That's when you really see the stem rot cause the effects on the plant.
Wow, that sounds like there's some interesting things in the pipeline.
Yeah. And, it might help also make decisions if you see that you're having high levels of stem rot, you might try to get that field burned. Now, you don't have to make that decision very early. You can wait till you harvest, or you can make decisions about what variety you want to have there. So we know that varieties that have very short periods of development tend to be more susceptible. And, the stemmer will be more severe in varieties like, M105 or the sweet rice. And so you might want to go with a 209 or a 211.
401?
401, yeah. After last year, I don't know if anybody wants to go with a 401.
But we'll see how much acreage is planted next year.
Yeah, we'll see.
I mean, we've been talking about this whole time. We've only got these basically 4 diseases in California rice. But in the Mid-South region, they deal with a lot of diseases. The insect problems too, but a lot more diseases compared to us all the way out here. Can you talk a little bit about why there's so much of a difference in the 2 geographic regions?
Yeah, I think the main reason is the weather. So we have our nice dry summer with no rainfall.
I've told people that out there, they cannot believe it. And I tell them the rain stops and then it doesn't start again until Thanksgiving, and they think I'm lying.
That's
but
funny.
It's true out here.
Yeah, I mean, in the South, they get rain all through the summer and all through harvest. And so we don't get that, and the humidity level is low. So that's one of the things that pathogens need. They need humidity. They need that high humidity. And we don't have that. So that limits a lot of pathogens. I think probably the fact that we're somewhat isolated, we're not near any of the southern states that produce rice might help us too. We don't have things being introduced, or the risk of things getting introduced is lower. And, if you think about it, the only diseases that we currently have that kind of were here all along are the tiller diseases. Blast was introduced sometime in the 90s. Kernel smut, I think it was first found sometime in the 80s. So yeah, we just don't have the conditions that diseases or pathogens like. Another thing is, I think the industry has been really smart in making sure that any materials that come into California, any rice seed that comes into California, there's a protocol that has to be followed. It has to go in the greenhouse first, make sure that there's nothing on it that would be harmful to the industry. And so I think that helps too in reducing the risk of getting something introduced.
We had Timothy Blank on here a while ago talking about the Rice Quality Assurance Program, the seed certification program. And part of the rationale behind those programs was also maintaining disease-free, weed-free seed. And so there's been a lot of industry effort focused on maintaining the quality of rice seed in California.
Yeah, and that's another very important factor. Yeah, I know Timothy won't let a field that's full of, say, blast or baccaning, to be a seed field. So yeah.
Well, Luis, I think we're about done with the lecture part of our talk, but I just started doing something recently, and I had poor Tim Johnson was my first experimental person on this question, but you get to be the second.
Okay.
What is your favorite rice variety to eat or consume in some fashion?
So my favorite type is medium grain rice.
It's a good answer.
Yeah. Now, my wife's, though, she likes more the basmati, which we don't eat all the time, but she tends to favor the long grains, and I tend to favor the medium grains. Whenever I buy the rice, or if I get a sample, I buy medium, I get medium grain, and then we eat medium grain. And, to me, I can eat anything with rice, but for her, it's like certain dishes have to have a certain type of rice, like Mexican food has to be long grain rice. So yeah, you learn about the rice. I don't know what you call that. The appropriate rice type that you're supposed to eat, like a wine, right? Like you have a white wine with fish or
a rice sommelier.
There you go.
Oh my goodness, that is really impressive.
You can't just have any rice with any dish. Well, I could, but
you're not supposed to. I think we've just invented a new career, and your wife might be our pioneer.
Yeah.
Well, Luis, thank you. Is there any sort of event you'd like to promote?
Well, we have, besides the annual grower meetings, we have the rice production workshop this year. I think in July. I can't remember the date exactly. That's up. a big event for us. I know a lot of growers like to attend, a lot of PCAs.
And that's a big one. That's a 2-day event, right?
It's a 2-day event, and this year we're going to have it
July 23rd and the 24th.
Yeah, and so it's going to be in Davis this year. It might be a little out of the way for some of the northern counties, but we're making it a little bit more available to the southern counties there. So we'll see.
Great. Okay. Well, with that, I mean, you've been on here a lot before. Your contact information is available, but you want to say it again for any of our new listeners?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, any issues, they want to discuss from last year or coming up here for getting ready for the new season, give me a call, 530-635-6234. And, you can text, and my email is on the website, on the internet. So, yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Luis.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
We have a few upcoming rice meetings in the new year. As you know, we'll be having our rice winter grower meetings in February. And so we have a series of meetings. They all have the same agenda. Don't go to every single meeting. You'll be awfully bored. But pick the one that's closest to you or most convenient to you, and attend that one. So the first one will be the Woodland meeting, which will take place February 10th at 8 a.m. The location for that will be the Yolo County Farm Bureau office. The second meeting will be the Richvale meeting, which will take place February 12th at 8 a.m. The location of that is the Richvale Evangelical Church. The Willows meeting will be that same day, February 12th, at 1 p.m., and that location will be the Glenn County Office of Education. The Colusa meeting will take place February 13th at 8 a.m. in the CIP conference room. And the Yuba City meeting will take place that same day again, February 13th at 1 p.m., and that'll be in the Veterans Hall. For more information about meeting times and locations or addresses and agendas, please feel free to look at our resources online. That'll include the UC Rice blog and the UC Agronomy website. Or feel free to call your local extension office for more information. In terms of other resources that you might take advantage of, you can also look at our newsletters, which include Rice Briefs, which covers Colusa Yolo, Rice Notes, which covers Yuba Sutter, Rice Leaf, which covers Butte and Glen, and Field Notes, which takes care of rice in the Delta region of California. Thanks for listening to Thoughts on Rice, a University of California Cooperative Extension podcast from the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. You can find out more about this podcast on our website, thoughtsonrice.buzzsprout.com. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's from using our text link in the show notes, a survey submission in our feedback form, also in the show notes, or in a comment or rating on your podcast streaming service of choice. We're also experimenting with polls on Spotify, so if you're listening on Spotify, you might have an option to answer some of those questions, and we might be able to talk about that on the air. You can also email us with any comments, questions, or concerns at thoughtsonrice@ucdavis.edu. We're glad to have you here for Season 2 of the Thoughts on Rice podcast. And remember, like the growers like to say, have a rice life. Mention of an agrochemical does not constitute a recommendation, merely the sharing of research findings. Always follow the label. The label is the law. Find out more at ipm.ucanr.edu. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own, and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of California. The material and information presented here is for general purposes only. The University of California name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service.